Welcome to New York Got Game.
Welcome back to another edition of New York Got Game. You can see we are in new studios here for the New York Post as we're back with the best digital basketball show in New York City. A lot going on in terms of New York basketball. St. John's, they are red hot and rolling, one of the best teams in the country. The Knicks, they are getting to a pretty good groove, or at least they were before the All-Star break. They're winners of 9 out of their last 11 games. But we still are in the middle of the All-Star break. No basketball until Thursday. But on this episode, we've got a lot to talk about with the Knickerbockers, and we're going to do that with a special guest. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it.
The Knicks are heating up.
Through the All-Star break, the New York Knicks, they have a record of 36-18. They currently sit at third place in the Eastern Conference. But despite their standing, there are many questions surrounding the Knickerbockers as they get set to play the final 28 games of the regular season. So we got some questions. And joining me to answer some of those questions is a contributor to Knicks Film School. It's my guy, Shawn Hardie, who joins me now. Shawn, what's going on? How you doing, man?
How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Listen, enjoying this All-Star break, but, we still got to talk some Knicks basketball. Basketball never stops. So, I'm good. I'm fine. How are you doing? I haven't talked to you since your Ravens got bounced out of the playoffs there, in NFL.
Yes, and I have not talked to you since we
I shouldn't even have done this.
Since we I have not spoken to you since we put the Steelers in the dirt and got them back to and ended their season. Don't worry, Russ is the savior. But yeah, I've been all right, man.
I just tried to check on a friend, see how a friend was doing. After his football team lost. This is a basketball show, and he had to come out here and choose violence. So I see what you did. I see what you did there.
When it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, I will always choose violence. What does Stephon Diggs say? I'll never be the bigger person. Yeah, when it comes to Steelers, I'll never be the bigger person.
The viewers can see that. You will not be the bigger person when it comes to that. But neither of our teams were in the Super Bowl, and we're here to talk about basketball. So what we're going to do today, just to let everybody know, we've got some burning questions, as I said, surrounding the Knicks. So Shawn and I have come up with 3 questions each, and we're going to discuss them, right? We got the questions, we're going to discuss them, and we're going to try to get some answers to these questions. So we're going to see how it goes. Shawn, I'm going to let you start and give me your first burning question surrounding the New York Knickerbockers. What do you got?
All right. I would not be a card-carrying member of Knicks Twitter if I did not ask this question, so let's get it out of the way now. Mm-hmm. Is the minutes load sustainable? Now, here's what I will say. I am not a member of the minutes police.
Okay.
However, I will not act like the minutes load does not matter. And I think that when people act like the minutes load doesn't matter, I'm like, no, it can't be one extreme is better than the other. This team is no longer, this is not 2021 when we were just happy to be there and we were just happy to get the 4 seed and see a playoff team and playoff games at Madison Square Garden after, 2 decades of futility. The goal of this team is not to play games in April and May, it's to play games in June. And if you don't get to June because by the end of the year, you're running out of guys, that's a problem. Now, again, I am not saying that they should all play 28 minutes a game and we should be playing Tyler Kolek and we should play Macomb Dottie. I'm not saying that. But I just go back to, Josh Hart had an abdominal strain, which basically put him on ice, which severely limited games 6 and 7. Mm-hmm. And I think it's reasonable to wonder if him playing the minutes he was playing at the position he was playing, playing power forward at 6'4", played a role. So I wonder how sustainable it is for, like you said, the next 28 games, plus probably a 6-game series in the first round, and then minimum a 6-game series in round 2.
So I want to say I think this is more than a fair question, right? And I'm with you. I don't think that you have to be in this situation where you're like, no, this doesn't matter at all. Minutes matter, right? Like wear and tear matters to some degree on this. I think where my concern is, Shawn, it seems like we're a little bit on the same page as this, is that does the wear and tear that we're saying is going to happen through an 82-game NBA season, does that then impact player performance, right? Or possible availability for them at some point when it really, really matters. And I'm not saying that the regular season doesn't matter. I'm actually not that person. What I'm saying is when the possessions become tighter, everything becomes more magnified in the playoffs, when the minutes are more intense for the players and you need to have your best players out there, do you want a situation that you saw last year where Josh Hart tears his abdominal muscle? Now, I think both of us are not saying that that is definitively the reason he tore his abdominal muscle, but we do know this because, at least here, we believe in science. And when you have that wear and tear, there is a more likelihood of you becoming injured. And so that is the concern for me. And so with that, you wonder, and this is where I'm going to, I guess, throw a question back to you about your question, is do you think Tibbs, particularly if Mitchell Robinson can come back healthy, and that's something we'll get to later, do you think that he will become more aware of this and maybe stretch the bench out a little bit more, have some more trust in a Landry Shamet, or because of the lack of size on this Knicks team, particularly on the bench, will he not trust the bench more and kind of say, look, we got to win these games, so I'm going to still play these guys a whole bunch of minutes? What do you think happens to that with the question that you posed?
I think that when Mitch comes back, because the thing is Mitch is a 5, so, and while Tom Thibodeau requires 48 minutes of rim protection, what you'll just see is when Cat's not in the game, Mitch is in the game. So let's say Cat is going to play 36 minutes a night. You know, let's just use a nice even number. So then Mitchell Robinson plays the other 12. And shout out to Fred Katz and Jonathan Macri, who were discussing Mitch when he comes back, and they were saying, like, you know, and I think John said that he sees Mitch and Cat playing double-digit minutes in the playoffs together, and Fred said he thought that that wouldn't happen, right? So if we go with the Fred theory, which I think is more plausible, although I do think you'll see some, but I think you'll see some of that double big lineup. We'll still be lacking. We'll still be leaning on the wings. So, and like, we have Deuce, we have Precious not a wing, but like our bench is like basically Deuce, Precious, and if he feels like playing Landry Shamet. And Landry Shamet, we've seen he's had a quick hook for Shamet. There's times Shamet does not play at all. So I'm not convinced that Mitch's return will ease the minutes load, because Tibbs isn't necessarily I won't say he's not creative. He doesn't necessarily like to experiment with lineups, unless he absolutely has to. And when I say absolutely has to, is like when his back is against the wall.
Yeah, no, you're right. We've seen that, right? Like, he hasn't necessarily done this unless there has been an injury. Like you said, that forces him to say, okay, got to play this guy. This has got to happen. We haven't seen that. So, look, I think it's a fair question if the minutes, the way they're currently being distributed, at least from what we've seen, if it's sustainable. Now, Tibbs has gone to a 9-man rotation since Martin Luther King Day, where he's played Landry Shamet. But like you said, Shawn, the minutes for Shamet, they've been really spotty, right? Sometimes you'll see 10, then maybe one game you'll see 4. So you're not really sure what you're going to get from him in that regard. So, no, good question. I don't know if we're going to get the answer for it soon or if we're going to get an answer at all, but it is a good question. All right, here's one question I had, and I'm sure this is one you've been thinking about too, okay? The Knicks right now, according to Cleaning the Glass, which I like to look at for their statistics because they take out garbage time minutes, they are ranked 18th in defense, giving up 115 points per 100 possessions. So my question is, we know that for a team to truly compete for a championship, usually they got to get up in that top 12, 11 range of defense. We saw this with the Denver Nuggets a couple years ago when they won the championship. They didn't start off as a good defensive team. So, Shawn, my question is, can the Knicks become a top 12 defense by season's end? They got 28 more games to get this done. The defense has been up and down. Can they become a top 12 defense?
So they can. Will they is the question.
Mm.
So I'm glad you brought up the Nuggets because that has been my bellwether all year. Like, if this team wants to be a championship contender, can they get to Denver's level of defense? Because very similarly, they have a very offensively gifted center, which, you know, leaves something to be desired on the defensive end. So that year, the Nuggets actually finished 17th in defensive rating according to Cleaning the Glass. However, to your point, they finished the season strong. In fact, the last 2 weeks of the season, they were 11th in defensive rating, right? So I think they can. What concerns me is of their 28 games left, they have 7 games against the top 12 teams in offensive rating.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of Cleveland, Boston. I had the same job here, but there's like a lot of really good offensive, like a lot of the really good offensive teams like Cleveland, Boston, Milwaukee, Chicago again. Like, it's gonna be tough. So I okay, I'll say this. I don't think they'll be a top 12 defense by season's end, but I think they can be a top 12 defense the last month of the season. And if they get to there, that's what matters because, there are times when this team was god awful defensively.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, but then at the same time, like, they got Cleveland, they got Boston, they got Dallas. Well, I don't know what Dallas is anymore. But good Lord. Good thing they're done with Indiana. But I think it'll be tough to be top 12 by the end of the season will be tough. I think their goal is to be like the last month of the season, be top 12 for that last month, and then hopefully carry that over to the playoffs.
Well, you might have actually affected my thinking here because if they can be top 12 or playing top 12 defense by that final month of the season, which is what you also were alluding to with the Nuggets, right? Playing some of your best basketball on both sides by the time you're heading into the playoffs is what most teams want. You always hear that. Try to play your best basketball as you're heading into the playoffs. I think that would be a good look for them. I think what I'm looking more for are those habits. We've seen stretches of this for the Knicks, right? So they have got up, according to Cleaning the Glass, they were within the top 12 at some point towards the end of last month. Start right before that 5-game winning streak that they had. They were starting to trend in that way. Now it's come back down. And a lot of that is, just to put context in numbers, a lot of that has to do with the fact OG Anunoby hasn't been out. So I do think where you can see a spike, where maybe you can be a little bit optimistic if you're a Knicks fan, OG Anunoby is back and he's healthy. Mitchell Robinson is back and he's healthy, if that is the case. We're going to get to that later, as I said. But I think if those things happen, that could give you some reason for optimism. I do agree. It's a tall order. You mentioned some of those good offensive teams they've got to play. They still have another game against Atlanta, another good offensive team who just put up, a $148 on them the other day in the last game before the All-Star break, which had to make you excited about their defense. So it's tough, but you hope that they're trending the right way with that. I know you have some other good questions coming up, but I just want to throw one other thing at you because you mentioned about them trending the right way and being a top 12 defense in March and April before the playoffs. If you see that, does that make you more optimistic about how they could compete with the Bostons and the Clevelands of the world? Would that make you more optimistic about that?
It will make me more optimistic about everyone, against everyone except Boston, because Boston's just a different animal. Like,
Fair.
I think the biggest issues defensively, if not one of the biggest issues they have on defense, is they don't communicate well on defense, and I think that's something that takes time. And I think that's something that takes, practice time, which unfortunately they don't have a lot of. Even though, yes, it's the All-Star break, but listen, everyone's in, Jalen Brunson's probably in Bahamas right now. Josh Hart's in Bermuda, something like that, right? So that comes with time. And by the end of the season, they could have a lot of that ironed out. I just think against Boston, I don't think our problem is communicating with defense. Our problem is, well, we have other problems, but like the 3-point defense, the variance, they're gonna put up a lot of threes. The way the way they can exploit the weaknesses in our lineups, what have you. But for everyone else, I'm optimistic that they could, especially like in a first round series, or if something happens and they don't end up having to play like a Boston in round 2, they could be in a better position to be better defensively.
Okay. No, I think that's fair. And I also think the concern with Boston, based on what we've seen from them play against Boston 2 times already this season, is absolutely more than fair as well. All right, Shawn, what's your next burning question? What's the next burning question that you got?
All right. Speaking of Boston, who, if the season ended today and the Knicks won in the first round, would be our opponent's second round. Can a third consecutive second round playoff exit be considered a successful season?
So, what I find interesting about this question, right? It's all about how do you define success. And our colleague, New York Knicks beat writer here at the New York Post, my colleague, Stephen Bondy, he said it'd be a failure if they don't reach the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't necessarily agree, right? Because I think context matters in all this stuff. And who you play, I agree. I think we both, okay, just to make sure we agree, we both feel like Boston is on another, they're on their own tier from the rest of the NBA. Are we, as the defending champs, are we in agreement on that? Okay. So we feel like that's where they are. If the Knicks play Boston in the second round, and let's say they lose in 7 games, a hard-fought 7-game series against the Celtics, maybe it comes down to final couple of shots and they lose. Do I think the season's a failure? No. And the reason I say no is because they would have competed with the best team in the NBA, the defending champions, in a year where they had 3 new players in their starting lineup. And as you mentioned before when we were just talking about defense, they're still learning. They're still learning how to communicate, all that stuff. I always looked at this season as I think it was going to be an adjustment period for the Knicks. There was going to be a lot of adjustment. They were going to find themselves out. They were trying to find their identity. You don't just put a team together and get an identity. So I think it could be disappointing, yes. I think if they lost like that, it could be a failure. Now, Shawn, if they get swept in the second round, or they have a gentleman's sweep, right? Or let's say somehow Boston dropped and they ended up losing to somebody else beside Boston in the second round, yeah, then it will be disappointing. So I feel like I don't want to answer that with a blanket statement because I think it depends on who they play, how they play. That's it. How do you feel about this?
So, in the Tom Thibodeau, Leon Rose era, the Knicks have made the playoffs 3 times, and each time they've been eliminated by the team that they were favored to beat.
Correct.
And each time they're eliminated by a lower seed. They're eliminated by a 5, an 8, and a 6. Now, to your point, context matters. Last year, they were down to 6.5 guys. And by the end of that game, not one player from the starting lineup from the beginning of the season was on the court at the end of the season. If they lose, there's some people that are going to be like pissed, like, oh my God, we lost in the second round again, right? If they lose, if they get their lunch handed to them by Boston, if it's a, like you said, if it's a gentleman's sweep or just not competitive, or it just looks like every single, like I've said to people, like I've been to 3 Celtics and Knicks games at Madison Square Garden the last 4 years, and and the closest game was like a 9-point loss. Like if it looks like that, it's hard to say it was a success simply because they assembled this team to beat that team.
Correct.
Like Cat is here because of they're figuring out ways to beat that team. I think if they lose to Boston, like you said, it's competitive, it's 7 games, it goes out to the wire, and they give their all, and Boston's just a better team, I won't consider it a failure. However, they can't lose to anybody else. Period. Not Cleveland, not Atlanta, not Indiana, not Orlando, not Milwaukee. They can't lose to anyone, barring injury, of course, right? They can't lose to anyone else. The only way this season can be considered successful if they lose in the second round is if they lose in 6 or 7 games to Boston, but it's a hard-fought series. Everything else is gonna get spooky.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement on this. We're in agreement on this. I don't think that this is a situation where I just don't. I generally don't like blanket statements like that. I understand why people do it, and I understand why it's a good discussion, even around journalism. And I understand also. I want to be clear. I don't want people to think, oh, well, Dex and Shawn, you're not raising the bar here. You don't think that this team should aspire to better. Yeah, no, we do, right? And I'm sure a lot of fans want them to aspire to better. But I just think as somebody watching and covering this team, I think you understand a little bit of the process. And I understand we're not trying to be like the Sixers. I'm not saying this is Sixers vibes over here. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a process to these things in terms of how a team comes together. They've got to take their lumps. This is not last year's Knicks team for a variety of reasons. Just the personnel that's not here. And I understand that these are not last year's expectations. But I think you got to look at everything in context. And I do think the context matters here. Now, I do think if they play the Celtics, to your point, they got to be competitive. If they're not competitive, that is not a good look. Now, part of the concern is they haven't been competitive in 2 games against the Celtics this year. It has not been a good look. They will get a look at the Cavs and the Celtics right after the All-Star break, which I think is good for this team. And we'll see how they are and see what happens around playoffs. But you're right. That's a great question by you. There's a lot of expectations. For some people, it's Eastern Conference Finals or bust when it comes to these Knickerbockers. All right. Mm-hmm. My second question that I have is around your boy Mitchell Robinson. Will Mitchell Robinson return, right? And here's the key word, folks. Will he be healthy for a playoff run? Not just healthy for a week, right? Will he be healthy for a playoff run so that you could see maybe some minutes with him and Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor? Maybe him, leading the defense on the second unit. Maybe him improving that Knicks defensive standing. Maybe that goes up. I think it's all nice if Mitchell Robinson comes back. I think you and I, Shawn, know what Mitchell Robinson can do, what he brings in terms of the offensive rebounding, in terms of his impact on the defensive end. But none of us know or have, well, let me not speak for you. I'm not sure he can stay healthy. Do you think he can return and be healthy and the Knicks can count on him for the playoff run? What say you, Shawn Hardie?
I think he will return. Can he stay healthy? He won't have to worry about Joel Embiid grabbing his leg this year because the Philadelphia 76ers will be nowhere near the playoffs. Knock on wood. I'm concerned if he can stay healthy. Even taking this current injury, first we heard December. Now and we heard this in the summer. His targeted return is the middle of December. December became January. January became February. Now we're here in March. That concerns me. Now, maybe they're taking a cautious approach, which is understandable because when it comes to big men and feet injuries, that can derail your career. I've seen and heard reports that Mitch has slimmed down because remember, 3 years ago, he was massive. One summer he was in the gym, he gained a lot of muscle. Mm-hmm. That could put stress on his feet as well. So him slimming down is that's good. Honestly, I have sometime around December, I decided that anything I got out of Mitchell Robinson this season was going to be a plus, and I'm just not going to. I don't want to say depend on him to be back, but I'm not going to rely on it. I'm just going to say, listen, we got who we got, and anything we get from Mitch is a plus. Because unfortunately, if you just look at the injury history, it's hard to say confidently that I believe that Mitchell Robinson will stay healthy for a playoff run. Because I thought last year, all right, he missed 3 months and he was getting back into shape, but whatever. It's okay, now we've arrested Mitch, and then granted, Joel Embiid did Joel Embiid things, but it's just it's hard for me to confidently say that he will be here for an extended playoff run.
Yeah, it's hard to say that. I think what it's not hard to say, though, is the Knicks need him to be healthy for this playoff run because of the things we were talking about before, right? In the fact that their defensive rating right now, 18th, according to Cleaning the Glass, trying to see if they can get it up to top 12. Can they even trend into that direction and play the right way? A big part of them doing that is going to be Mitchell Robinson. If he is healthy, I think there's a great chance that that could happen. But I'm with you. You can't bank on it. You can't say that you believe that he's going to be healthy because there's nothing. There's no evidence from before to show you that he will be. Now, I will say, in terms of being slimmed down, he did look good when he spoke to the media recently. I think that can help him a lot. But a lot will be known, more will be known with Mitchell Robinson in terms of how he looks when he comes back, running, cutting, the practicing, the then getting into game shape, playing with his teammates. All those things will matter. I think I'm with you. Anything you get out of him is a plus, Shawn. But I'll tell you what, if you only get one game out of him, and let's say he gets hurt again, it's going to be a major disappointment. You want to talk about major disappointments? Woo! That one would not be good at all whatsoever. So I think all the Knicks fans out there, they are knocking on wood and hoping that he can stay healthy for the Knicks playoff run. And like you said, the one good thing is he likely will not have to see Joel Embiid this playoff run. So nobody will be pulling on his leg unless there's a new Joel Embiid out there and somebody decides to pull on his leg. All right, Shawn, you got one more. What's your last burning question for these last 28 games for the New York Knickerbockers?
Okay. Well, before I get there, I will say this. I do think that some people believe that some Knicks fans believe that Mitch's return will be the magic elixir that fixes everything. And I would ask them to kindly slow down because guess what? Like we're saying, against Boston, the reason why Karl-Anthony Towns is here is because against Boston, it's a bad matchup. So let's not make Mitch to be like the savior that will come in and fix everything. All right. Last question. And we touched on it when talking about the, how successful the season could be, or if losing to the Celtics, and should they be expected to win this year, whatever. How long is this team's championship window?
I think that when the front office made the moves they made this past offseason, right, Shawn? Once they decided to go all in for Bridges, once they decided to make the Karl-Anthony Towns move, you're looking at this realistically as a 3 to 4 year window with ideally 4 years. With the way this current core is constructed, the way the finances are constructed. Now, this is also assuming that they would give Mikal Bridges an extension on top of that. Top of the 2 years that he had starting before this season, left on his deal. Here's the problem with answering this question. Who knows what's going to happen in the NBA? Luka Doncic just got traded for nothing. Who knows? Who knows in the NBA right now, right? It's really hard to predict windows. I think there was a time where you could look at things in the NBA and say, okay, man, this team is going to be together 5-6 years. I think those days are gone. I think you kind of got to think now in like 2 year spurts. But I think realistically, like the way this group is constructed, 4 years in terms of being able to compete for an NBA championship should be realistic. Now, you got the apron stuff that also constricts things, right? How do the Knicks improve this team, Shawn? Can they add depth? Depth is a major concern for this Knicks team. We've been talking about that already today. How do they tweak the margins, so to say? I think that's going to be the important thing. If they can tweak the margins, if they can hit on some of the draft picks they had last year, whether it's a Tyler Kolek emerging as a backup point guard, and Ariel Hukporti emerging as a backup center, if they can hit on some of those, that's how you can tweak those margins and extend that window, or at least get to 4 years. And obviously health. Health is a major concern, right, in answering that question. Because if you ain't healthy and you're not available, well, it's hard to really have a long window. I think where if you're a Knicks fan, and I'm intrigued to hear what you have to say on this too, is I think your faith in this window, a lot of it has to do with the leadership of Jalen Brunson. If you believe in Jalen Brunson as the leader of this team, and then you also believe in what the front office has done to support him, then I think you can have a good 3 to 4 year window. But what I think is really important, and I'm not punting this season away, so I'm very clear on what I'm saying here. It goes back to a little bit of what you're saying. How's this team playing towards the end of the season? What happens in the playoffs? And then what happens after that, right? How do they tweak things, try to build in this team? How does this team maybe move or improve on the continuity that they had off of this season? There's a chance that, and I know people don't want to hear this, next season is a lot more important for this Knickerbocker team and what happens there than actually what happens this season.
No, I agree. I think they have by design a 4-year window because karl-Anthony Towns has 3 more years of his contract after this one, in which case it will be unrestricted free agent. But like you said, things can change in NBA like that, and maybe I'll say this: the Knicks have some guys on their team right now that would fetch some things in a trade. So even though the Knicks have used all their draft capital, they have guys that other teams would want, and if they felt as if they need to make a move, they have players that are coveted. Now, I don't think one of those people is Jalen Brunson. Not that he's not coveted, but I don't think Leon is trading his godson. But the rest of the guys could fetch something. I would say the window is at least 2 years. I think you have this year, which to your point, isn't a throwaway year, but it's all right, let's see what we got here. Yeah. Next year you could have conference finals minimum, like that's the minimum, that's the floor, or we have problems, right? But if they have a disappointing season next season, then I'll say this. This team is currently constructed has 2 years together. This season and next season. After that, anything is possible. Like, listen, trade for Giannis? Who knows? Someone wants OG Anunoby.
Look at you. You're out here starting rumors. Out here starting rumors.
My brother in Christ. That rumor has been thrown around a lot. I wish I could take credit for that. But people like OG Anunoby. People like Mikal Bridges, right? Like, people like Josh Hart. Now, I'm not saying that Josh Hart can get you a haul. And for the record, I'm not necessarily trading in these guys. What I'm saying is if July 1, 2026 comes around and the Knicks have not made an NBA Finals, tough decisions may have to be made. So I would say their window is at least 2 years. It's designed to be 4, but depending how these next 2 postseasons go will determine if that window is extended or it closes shorter than we think.
No, I would agree. And I think in 2 years, if they don't win a title, I know that sounds very short, but in terms of they pushed all their chips in, I think you're right. There will be some changes. The roster you see now may not be the final championship roster. It probably won't be, to be honest. It likely won't be. I don't know what those tweaks are. Now, you're right. The fans like to go big game hunting, and especially as I just mentioned with Luka Doncic getting traded, anything's possible. Nothing would surprise me, Shawn, in the NBA today at all whatsoever. All right, this is the last one for me. My last burning question for the Knicks over these final 28 games is, okay, Knicks sit at 3rd in the East, right? Cleveland, number 1 in the East. Boston, number 2. The Knicks are not that far off from Boston, right, as they start here after the All-Star break. Is it important that the Knicks finish 2nd in the East, so if they do face Boston, who would then drop to 3rd in that second round, they would have home court advantage? Is it important that the Knicks finish with the 2 seed in the East? What do you say?
Oh, man. At first I wanted to say it doesn't matter, but now I think it does because, chances are the Celtics are going to win a playoff game in Madison Square Garden. So if you have 4 playoff games, then you can it's easy to drop a home playoff game when you have 4 of them as opposed to when you have 3 of them. So I actually do think I don't think it's imperative, but they have less room for error if they're the 3 seed. Because again, Boston's going to win one, especially with their 3-point variance. Boston's going to win a game in MSG. So are you going to go to, and I'm not calling it TD Garden because there's only one Garden in the NBA, so I refer to it as the TD Jakes Center.
Hey.
Are you going to go to the TD Jakes Center and win twice? And listen, we saw them going to Boston, the IQ game, skipping around the arena, which is the day he lost the sixth man award, but I'm not bitter. So yes, they've done it, but that was before this iteration with Porzingis at the 5 and Derek White and Drew Holiday, what have you. They're 2.5 games out of the second seed. I actually placed a wager for them to win the Atlantic Division at the beginning of the year because I looked at Boston because we had a ton of home games and Boston had a ton of road games. I said, you know what? They might be able to catch them. They might be able to catch them because Boston being the defending champion knows that they just got to get to the tournament healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think they're going to go all out to try and get that 2 seed. Of course, the Knicks decided to, flush a couple games down the drain earlier in the month, early in January. Here we are. So look, knowing who this team is, listen, this team will play anyone, anywhere, anytime. They will play Boston on the moon. They will play them on Jupiter. They will play them in Australia. But they have the more margin of error they have is the better. So if they can get to 2, I would implore them to do so. But if they don't, as the kids say, if they get to the second round, as the kids say today, check ball.
Yeah, you got to play. You still got to play the games, right? Still got to play the games no matter where they are. Now, I do think that it could be a huge psychological boost for the team, even if they're just ahead of them in the regular season. Now, that's all fine and well until the ball's thrown up in the playoffs. Everybody's 0-0 when that series starts. But listen, an extra game in your back pocket, to your point, at MSG, which will be pumped up for those games, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a goal to go for. Now, I will say one thing. If they are going to go for this goal over the final 28 games, this kind of affects the first question that you brought up, Mr. Hardie.
I was thinking the same thing.
You think the same thing? We're on the same page, all right? That means Coach Thibodeau is going to go really hard, and I don't know how those minutes are going to be divvied up. So those things might be a little bit challenging in terms of that. And so it's like, how hard do you want to go for this? Now, if you're in striking distance, I think you should go for it. I'm always for win as many games as you can, try to get the best seed as you can. That is what the regular season is for, along with developing your team, trying to grow. So it's something I think the Knicks should go for. You just don't want it to negatively hurt them in the other areas, like, being healthy and not being overextended before the playoffs. That's not what you want. That's it, man. This was good. I'm glad we got to, we had some good, I think we had some good questions the Knicks fans could appreciate. I'm sure a lot of people have a lot more questions, like when are the Knicks going to win? All panic mode. Last thing I'll ask you before I let you get out of here, Shawn, it sounds to me from listening to, us talk about these different questions you had that you feel like this team is reasonably in a pretty good place in terms of their building and development. Is that where you're at? Or, what's your level of concern with this team overall on a scale of 1 to 10? I guess that's the easier question I should ask. What's your level of concern with this team in terms of their ability to win a championship?
My concern level is 3. If 1 means I have no concerns at all, and 10 is like sound the alarm.
Yeah.
My concern is at a 3. I have questions about certain players have warts. The coach has his tendencies, what have you. But they're in a really good position. They're 39-18, not a 30. 36-18.
36-18, sorry.
Yes. Shout out to Jeremy Cohen, who's pointed out about teams that the Pat Riley quote about if you get to 40 wins before 20 losses, you're in a really good position. I think like half the teams that 30% of the teams that got to 40-19 or better, like made the conference finals. So I'm not concerned because listen, 10 years ago, Like it's funny. It was All-Star Weekend this weekend. I found a picture of me and my friends at some All-Star Weekend festivities in 2015 when the game was in New York. And in February 2015, this team was like nowhere.
Yeah.
So the fact that we're now complaining about, oh, is the Eastern Conference Finals or bust, or are we to lose to Boston at 6 or 7 to make it hard for a series? It's a testament to the work of Leon Rose, who changed everything here, and Tom Thibodeau, and Jalen Brunson, and Josh Hart, and Julius Randle, and R.J. Barrett, and Emmanuel Quickley. So I'm not overly concerned right now, especially like you said earlier, this is year one. They basically put this team together a week before training camp. Next year, we will expect to see improvements and to be a bona fide stamped contender. But I'm not that concerned right now. So many Knicks teams have looked at things in the short term and then had knee-jerk reactions and made short-term moves that sacrificed the long-term ability of the franchise to compete. This front office is not doing that. So I'm not going to lose my you-know-what if the Knicks don't win the championship this year. So my concern level is at a 3. At the same time, if we identify issues and we ignore them and just keep doing the same thing over and over and expect a different result, and we know what the definition of that is, then my concern level will rise. But right now, 3.
That's good. I think that's healthy. I think 3 is a healthy level of concern in the first year of this team as they currently are constructed. And we'll see how it goes for the New York Knicks. Should be an interesting final 28 games for this team, but it has been a pretty decent start at 36-18 and 4 wins away from 40 wins on the season. So we'll see how all that goes. That is Shawn Hardie. Check him out with the great folks at Knicks Film School. They do a fantastic job there. Shawn, I'm just going to, I checked in on how you were doing at the beginning in your football fandom. We're not even going to talk about football. I'm just going to wish you well, brother, because I know you might come back with some Steeler shots to me, and I'm not really in the mood for that at all whatsoever. Your concern level is at a 3. I just want to have good vibes to finish this segment. So I just want to thank you for coming on with your knowledge and your expertise and your good vibes, other than that football team you root for. But I appreciate you, man. Just want to let you know.
Thank you, Dexter. And I appreciate you too, even though
here we go.
All the teams that we root for in other sports are sworn enemies or just don't like each other, we have the New York Knicks, and that keeps us together.
Yeah, we can see, and it's all about bringing people together. I appreciate you, man. Got to have you back on New York Got Game soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As Black History Month continues, this week we honor a true trailblazer in New York basketball history. His name is Solly Walker, the first black player to ever suit up for St. John's men's basketball. Now, Walker, he made history in 1950 when he stepped onto the court for the Redmen, now the Red Storm, during a time when college basketball was still heavily segregated. He was a standout player from Boys High School in Brooklyn, and Walker's talent was undeniable, but his journey, it was far from easy. Faced racism head-on, especially in hostile road environments. One of the most infamous moments came in 1951 when St. John's traveled to Lexington, Kentucky to play Adolph Rupp's Wildcats. Walker was subjected to racial slurs, and his safety was even a concern. But through it all, he remained resilient. Despite the challenges, he excelled on the court, helping St. John's reach the NIT and NCAA tournaments. His courage and perseverance opened doors for future generations of black athletes to wear the St. John's uniform with pride. Beyond basketball, Walker went on to dedicate his life to education, serving as a teacher and administrator in New York City's public school system for over 30 years. His impact extended far beyond the hardwood, shaping young lives the same way that he shaped history at St. John's. Because of pioneers like Solly Walker, black players at St. John's and across the country have had the opportunity to chase their dreams, and his name may not always be in the headlines, but his legacy is written in history. So salute to Solly Walker, a true game changer. Okay, so when basketball returns on Thursday, it's going to be a pretty interesting stretch for the Knicks. They've got the Bulls. They face at the Garden that night on Thursday. Then a back-to-back big game on Friday night against the Cleveland Cavaliers in Cleveland. And then Sunday against another top team in the East, they face the Boston Celtics. You remember what happened in the first couple of games where the Knicks played the Celtics, the massacre in Boston on opening night, and then just a couple of weeks ago, Knicks did not get the job done against the Celtics at the Garden. They were blown out once again. So the Celtics are going to try to see if they can beat the Knicks again. The Knicks, they're going to try to see if they can finally get a win over the Celtics, a win over the Cavs. They are 0-3 against both teams this year. These are big games that fans are going to be looking at to see what they can do. That's going to do it for this edition of New York Got Game. Special thanks to my guests from Knicks Film School, my guy Shawn Hardie. As always, we got to thank the people that work on this lovely show. Technical director Sam Antona, editor Antonio Oliveras Nicole, all the great staff here at New York Post Sports. I'm Dexter Henry. We'll catch you next time on New York Got Game.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.